Росія принесла війну на нашу землю і повинна відчувати, що нею зроблено.
Well, friends, no sooner said than done. This is exactly what Ukrainian forces are doing. In a surprise move carried out with the utmost secrecy of any operation in this cursed war, this past Tuesday, August 6th, the Ukrainian army struck at Russia. Now, the board has changed, and in a big way. It's the first time since World War II that the army of another country has invaded Russia. And it's also the first time since this war began in 2022 that the front is no longer just in Ukraine. Now, it's also on Vladimir Putin's lands. We still can't know how far the Ukrainians plan to go, but we do know that this is not a minor skirmish. We are witnessing the opening of a new front. Ukraine has deployed battalions from two of its best brigades, the 22nd Mechanized Brigade and the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. These two formations are the creme de la creme of Ukrainian armed forces. They have experienced and well-trained soldiers, are equipped with NATO gear, and are well rested. Until now, the Ukrainian army had kept them in reserve, waiting to use them in a future counter-offensive. Well, now their moment has come. Now they are in combat. But let's pause for a moment here. This is surprising, because we want to make this point very clear. In this offensive, Western equipment is being used, both European equipment and especially American. And this is something new. Until now, Washington has been very concerned about avoiding an escalation that could spiral out of control. Don't forget, Russia is a nuclear power. Precisely for this reason, they've been very reluctant to allow Ukraine to use their equipment to attack positions inside Russia. Yes, in recent months, they authorized the use of HIMARS and even the US Army's tactical missile systems, the famous ATACMS, to strike military positions in Crimea or near the border with Ukraine that threatened the country. This was already seen as a huge paradigm shift, but now we're talking about something completely different. We're talking about the outright invasion of Russia, an invasion with troops, armored vehicles, drones, artillery, helicopters, air defense systems, electronic warfare equipment, and so on. And of course the question is, did Washington know about this attack? Did they really give the green light to this operation? In our previous video here on VisualPolitik, we explained how this operation is unfolding and what objectives the Ukrainians might be pursuing. And now, in this video, we're going to focus on the major takeaways from this offensive. Did Washington know about this operation? How could the Russians have been caught so completely off guard? Why now? And why take such a big risk? Are we perhaps witnessing an all-or-nothing operation? Dear community, this is exactly what we're going to delve into next. The key points left by the Ukrainian invasion of Kursk. Only then can we truly understand what the hell is going on. Stay tuned. I think we are all still in shock over what can only be described as a bold, reckless, brilliant, or even crazy move, but certainly not an expected one. The war in Ukraine has dragged on far longer than anyone could have anticipated. We're talking about 2.5 years of bloody confrontations, an insane level of destruction, and a ruthless struggle for every square meter of ground. In 2022, for instance, Russia's initial rapid invasion ended with Ukraine pushing them back. In 2023, Zelensky's troops attempted another much-hyped counter-offensive, in which many of us had confidence, but it turned out to be a disaster. Despite the intense fighting, they achieved almost nothing. And in 2024, the tables turned. Since the spring, it's been Russia on the offensive. The Russians have attacked almost non-stop, day after day, along the entire front, in Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kharkiv. The effort has been colossal, the damage to the Ukrainians immense, and yet they barely managed to capture a few hundred square kilometers. Then August arrives, and suddenly, boom! A Ukrainian army, desperately short on men, equipment, and ammunition, launches an attack on Russia itself. In just the first 3 days, they managed to capture hundreds upon hundreds of square kilometers of Russian territory, more than they achieved in their 2023 counteroffensive, and more than the Russians have gained in Ukraine in 2024. So the first question, the first key we need to unlock, is very clear. How could this invasion operation have taken the Russians by surprise? So, isn't this combat zone that Ukraine has become supposed to be closely monitored with drones, satellites, and spies? How on earth did the Russians not notice anything? And why on earth weren't they prepared? Well, my friends, here we can find a historical precedent. Remember that story about how during the Allied Normandy landings in World War II, the Nazis didn't alert the Führer because he was sleeping? Well, in a way, history has repeated itself. Russian intelligence had detected Ukraine's movements. Maybe they weren't entirely sure what the heck was going on, but they saw how Ukrainian troops were massing around the border and also noticed strange movements of equipment and supplies. The Russian intelligence service saw this and warned the military high command about 2 weeks before the attack. However, nothing was done. And nothing was done mainly because the guy you see on screen, Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the Russian General Staff, completely ignored all these warnings. Why? Probably because no one could believe that Ukraine would dare to invade Russia itself. They surely thought, if they're having so much trouble maintaining the existing front line, how on earth are they going to attempt another venture? How the heck would they dare to invade Mother Russia? No, that can't be it. Ukrainians are surely playing tricks. This must have been what went through Gerasimov's mind, who didn't even bother to warn Vladimir Putin about the troop buildup and strange movements detected by the intelligence services. And of course, the problem was already revealed to us about a year ago by the ill-fated Prigozhin when he rebelled against Putin and launched his crazy march toward Moscow. There's nothing inside Russia. All the important equipment is in Ukraine, and what's left is a complete wasteland. So the border guards, reservists, and soldiers in the Kursk Oblast didn't have the equipment to face the mechanized brigades that Ukraine has used in this offensive. The result? The Ukrainians have advanced at full speed. So far, Moscow's only response has been to launch airstrikes with planes, helicopters, and Iskander ballistic missiles to try to slow the advance. And yes, they've logically hit the Ukrainians and caused casualties, but they've nowhere near managed to stop the operation. And now, to top it all off, the Russians have another problem. Moving their troops from the front in Ukraine might not be so easy, especially when it comes to heavy equipment. Why? Well, first, because they're deployed over 217 miles away with a logistical system that, frankly, seems prehistoric. And second, because the new Ukrainian front is protected by artillery, including HIMARS and even ATACMS, which can strike with devilish precision from 186 miles away. So this means it's going to take the Russians more time to get organized. That's one of the advantages, of course, that Ukraine has counted on. And that's not even all. To top it off, the Russians have been on the offensive for months, which has naturally worn them down. We're talking about combat casualties, lost equipment, damaged equipment, tired troops. We're in the final phase of a very tough operation. And now, on top of everything, this. So in Moscow, they're scrambling to find alternatives quickly to prevent things in Kursk from getting out of hand. And that's why, according to some leaked reports, they're sending in former Wagner Group personnel as the vanguard. It even seems they're calling units that were deployed in Mali. Crazy. You know, we think Kursk is going to make a lot of headlines in the coming days. In any case, I wouldn't want to be Gerasimov right now. But of course, this isn't the only question this operation leaves us with. Did the United States know anything about this attack? Washington denies it. But I don't know, it seems a bit strange, especially considering that Ukraine is carrying out this operation with US equipment. It's hard to believe they would go rogue, using that equipment without authorization and completely disregarding their major ally. I don't know, Rick, it seems hard to believe. But then what? Well, as we mentioned earlier, Washington has always been careful not to cross certain lines that could provoke a major escalation. And of all the red lines we can think of, invading Russia itself is, I don't know, the biggest one possible, don't you think? So friends, this brings us directly to a kind of political struggle that has been unfolding in the corridors of the Biden administration over the years. Specifically, I'm talking about the differing positions that have pitted Secretary of State Antony Blinken against the president's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. You see, Blinken is the Secretary of State responsible for foreign policy, and he is personally very close to Joe Biden. Well, Blinken is also very close to Ukraine. Let's say his position throughout the war has been that the United States should be much more ambitious and less fearful of Moscow. On the other hand, Jake Sullivan believed that they needed to be much more cautious to avoid a possible escalation with a country that, after all, is a nuclear power and could become a huge headache for Europe. Let's say both of them support Ukraine, but at very different paces. And friends, Jake Sullivan is no ordinary figure. He has a huge amount of influence. As National Security Advisor, he not only effectively leads the National Security Council, but unlike Blinken, he works in the White House. That means he spends much more time with President Biden, which naturally allows him to have much more influence over him. The fact is, in contrast to Blinken's thesis, Biden also shared the idea that they should be more, let's say, cautious to avoid a major escalation in the conflict at all costs. I'm sure you now understand why the Ukrainians adore Blinken and, on the other hand, aren't so fond of Sullivan. But wait a minute, Josh, what does all this have to do with what's happening in Kursk? Well, a few weeks ago, an absolutely crucial event occurred that could completely change the course of the war. I'm referring, of course, to Joe Biden's decision to withdraw from the presidential race, which opens up a much more uncertain future for Ukraine. Despite everything, Biden has been a close ally of Kyiv and has made the war in Ukraine one of the major actions of his administration. But he won't continue. No matter what happens, on January 20th, Biden will leave the White House. And here, as we said, an uncertain scenario unfolds. If Trump wins, it seems we could say goodbye to Ukraine. The former president has repeatedly promised to end the war quickly, which probably means effectively giving Putin the victory, even if it means cutting off aid to Zelensky's government. In fact, just a few days ago, during his campaign, Trump congratulated Putin himself on the prisoner exchange. Well, what can I say? It doesn't seem to bode well.
I'd like to congratulate Vladimir Putin for having made yet another great deal.
But Harris's victory is also an enigma. First, because Harris is much more focused on domestic policy than on international policy. And second, because although she supports Ukraine, she may not be willing to swallow this bitter pill. In other words, in the end, we're talking about a war that everyone associates with Biden. Is she really going to maintain the same level of commitment and let it dictate her entire term? Well, I don't know, but it seems the Ukrainians aren't too confident. And you know what? They're not the only ones. Check this out.
Poland warns Europe to prepare for change in US ties, regardless of next president.
As you can see, not long ago, the Polish foreign minister said that Europeans need to prepare for a change in the transatlantic relationship, a change that would make them less important to Washington. He said that Europeans need to prepare, no matter who wins in November. And do you know when he said this? Right after Biden announced his withdrawal from the campaign. Connect the dots yourself. So to summarize, Ukraine certainly doesn't trust Trump, but they're not entirely confident in Harris either. And this could have convinced them of the importance of taking action while Joe Biden is still president. Perhaps Biden himself is thinking along the same lines, that it's now or never. For Ukraine's sake, and because it wouldn't be a great legacy to see this country, in one way or another, fall to the Russian bear. And maybe this has strengthened the position of Kyiv and Blinken that now is the time to be much tougher. Whether to try to force negotiations, end the war, or get the future White House more involved, for whatever reason. And that's why, despite what they say about not knowing anything, it's very likely that the White House has indeed given the green light to this operation. Because honestly, what can we say? If things had continued as they were, it wasn't looking good for Ukraine. Up until now, this country's resistance has been titanic, almost heroic, but they've always faced a recurring problem: terribly slow delivery of weapons and equipment, which has forced them to bear a terrible human cost. And that's not all. In addition to the lack of equipment, there is also a shortage of trained soldiers, recruitment issues, and economic problems. The war has dragged on for too long. Until now, there was a plan to attempt an offensive in 2025, possibly the last major offensive. We've talked about this strategy in previous videos here on VisualPolitik. It's the so-called Estonia plan, which NATO and Ukraine adopted months ago. The problem is that without Biden, Kyiv may no longer be confident that this is possible. Among other things, because sadly, the war in Ukraine hardly matters to anyone anymore. We just need to look at the media. 2 years ago, if Ukraine had invaded Russia, it would have been the top story on every front page for days and weeks. Today, it barely even makes the news. And friends, in politics, if you're not in the media, you don't exist. Why would Harris spend enormous political capital on an issue that matters less and less? In part, we think this action had that objective as well, as we mentioned in our previous video, to change the narrative and put the war back on the map. We'll see now how far this offensive goes, but perhaps this move is the only one that could make the Russians willing to sign a just peace, or at least the only way to keep the resistance alive. One way or another, we might be witnessing one of those moments when a bold move suddenly changes history. Because now, one thing is very clear: the war has reached Russia. If Ukraine manages to strengthen this front, we could be looking at the major turning point that allows us to overcome what we might call a bloody stalemate, attacking against all odds to gain an advantage and either negotiate or regain the initiative. Here at VisualPolitik, we'll be closely following everything that happens. And that's not to mention the enormous toll on Vladimir Putin, a man who for years prided himself on being the leader who protected Russia. Now, not only has he turned the war in Ukraine into a disaster for the country, but there are also foreign tanks moving through Russia. We'll have to see how he reacts, but no matter what happens, he'll come out of this significantly weakened. We'll talk about it soon. But friends, now it's your turn. What do you think will be the outcome of this Ukrainian offensive? Will it be a turning point in the war? Or do you think it will amount to nothing? The debate is open in the comments. And now, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. Thank you very much for joining us once again. All the best. See you next time.